how important is it to be able to communicate well? It turns out, good communication can sometimes be the difference between life and bloodshed. This is the story of Paul Rusesabagina, an ordinary man who lived through an extraordinary event, and with nothing more than gentle persuasion through the power of words, was able to save almost 1,000 lives. Our story takes place in Rwanda, a small African nation that's always struggled with political tension, bribery, and corruption. Born in the 1950s in Rwanda, Paul came from humble beginnings. He was one among 9 children in a lower middle-class home, sometimes too poor to own shoes. Oftentimes, the children took turns sleeping on the beds or the floor of the home. Despite their own financial struggles, Paul grew up watching his parents take care of those who were worse off, spending time distributing food and care packages. When Paul's parents discovered he had a knack for language at a young age, they sent him to the best school they could afford. Soon, Paul became fluent in English and French, a skill that would serve him throughout his life, especially during fateful events several years later. As a young man who was able to speak multiple languages, Paul began work at the front desk of one of the fanciest hotels in Rwanda. Through dedication and skillful communication, he was eventually promoted to assistant manager of the Hotel des Mille Collines, a 5-star Belgian-owned hotel where only the wealthy and famous were able to stay. With a wonderful job, Paul was living a very comfortable life. It was the 1990s. Tension between the Tutsi and Hutu, 2 groups of people in Rwanda, was high and threatened to erupt into violence at any moment. Both groups had a history of mistrust with each other, something Paul did not understand, for he was both Tutsi and Hutu. Paul had seen clashes between Tutsi and Hutu his entire life. In fact, his parents would often offer refuge to people running from conflict. On April 6, 1994, tensions between both groups finally reached a breaking point. A plane carrying the Hutu president went down. Everyone on board was killed. An uproar went up among the people. Hutu extremists blamed this on the Tutsi. The Tutsi denied it, but to no avail. Within an hour of the plane crash, roadblock barricades were sent up and genocide of the Tutsis began. Mass violence and murder spread throughout the country with shocking speed and brutality as ordinary citizens were enticed to participate. Neighbors killed neighbors, even husbands killed wives. Tutsis were slaughtered and no place was safe. These events of the next 100 days would become known as the Rwandan genocide. Soldiers came to Paul's home demanding he open the hotel so they may use it as a temporary headquarters for an interim government. During their time at the hotel, Paul knew his life was in danger. It was common knowledge that he was both Hutu and Tutsi, but Paul managed to stay calm and interact with the volatile members of the temporary government with extreme care. When the interim government evacuated the hotel, Paul immediately called the hotel headquarters, notifying them of what was happening. He asked to be made acting general manager. Via fax, they put him in charge. The hotel had over 1,200 residents, including some who had come to seek shelter from the open violence. As Hutu militiamen rampaged through the streets, Paul used skillful communication to persuade the killers against targeting those who had sought refuge in the Hotel Mille Collines. With his charm and the resources of the hotel, beer and cash, he diverted the killers. With gentle persuasion, he bribed army generals with dollars and cigars. Outside the gates, Rwandans were hacked to death, burned, or shot. At one point, hundreds of militia holding spears, machetes, and rifles surrounded the hotel. Paul was ordered to evacuate the building. The militants had only one goal in mind: the slaughter of everyone inside. Paul would not leave. Instead, he got on the phone and used his connections to call in favors with some of the high-profile people who used to pass through the hotel. The attack was successfully called off. Inside, Paul managed to keep everyone safe. He made sure the resources in the hotel could be stretched to feed everyone. They would have to wait for the massacre to end. There was no other option. There was no way to safely evacuate. The hotel became a fortress, a safe haven. The Rwandan genocide would last 100 days, and the number of murdered would reach 800,000. Millions would become displaced refugees in neighboring countries. The genocide finally ended when Mr. Kagame, a Tutsi, led forces to end the slaughter. Later, he would go on to become president. Paul, his life in danger in a country that has never seen political rest, took his family and left. He knew returning would only mean death. Where is Paul today? Paul is now a political prisoner in Rwanda, a place he had swore he would never return to. He was lured there through an elaborate ruse. Thinking he was going to a different country, Paul boarded a plane that landed in the capital of Rwanda. Human Rights Watch call what has happened to him forced disappearance. Rwanda is an authoritarian regime run by President Kagame, who holds absolute power and has a reputation for dealing harshly with opponents. And Paul had spent the last several years criticizing the post-genocide government. We join others in calling for the release of Paul, whose only crime was saving people from massacre, and calling out the questionable Rwandan leadership. For using only the power of communication to save more than 1,000 lives during a genocide that claimed almost 1 million, Paul Rusesabagina is a hero.